All right, we're going to start in, like I said, Exodus chapter 18. This is the chapter all about, or this is the Torah portion that is all about Jethro. It's all about the commandments, the Ten Commandments. We're right at the base of Mount Sinai. We're right at the base of the connection of hearing the voice of God. Now, if I'd asked the question, how many of you want to hear the voice of God? Every one of you are going to raise your hand. Yes, I want to hear the voice of God. And for those of you that want to hear that do hear the voice of God, I want to hear the voice of God more. And so there's not a person in the sound of my voice that would not want to grow in that hearing, that inner voice of hearing His voice. But if I was to go back 3,200 years ago and say to the Israelites, how many of you want to hear the voice of God? That is a bizarre question, because in those cultures you don't hear voices of gods. That's not how that works. The average person does not hear a voice of a god, or in Hebrew that word would be Elohim, judges of the earth. That's just something unheard of. And so you need to understand a little bit about the culture before we get into the context, is that in Egypt, there was gods for everything. Matter of fact, a lot of Egyptian scholars will tell you that there was upwards of 60 gods just in Egypt alone. In Egypt proper, there were 60 plus gods. They had gods of everything, from war to peace to fertility, to probably gods of breakfast cereal. There was gods for everything. And the way that the gods worked is quite different, because we look at gods based on how our interaction is with our God today. But that's not how they interacted with gods. Today we're very free to interact with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob on a very personal level, from the inside of our temple, from deep calling to deep. But that is not the way that it worked back then. It was very disattached. When you had a god in ancient Egypt, the gods were so great and so powerful that there was no way to have interaction between a mere human being and a god. And so this is where the idols came in handy. The idols were simply mediators between the gods and men. They were not the gods themselves. And so from our American 21st century Western Greco-Roman perspective, we look at gods, or idols, and we say those were gods. They were not gods. Please do not insult the intelligence of people that built the pyramids, when we have no idea how to replicate what they did. They were extreme intellectual people. We can't even figure out, in American science, we cannot even figure out how the Greeks had clocks in every city timed to the microsecond. They had real clocks. And they knew how to tell time. They didn't have digital clocks back then. It was far beyond even the sundial. These were real clocks ticking on the microsecond, down to the millisecond. We can't even figure out how they did it. So these are very, very intelligent people. So they're not stupid. They know that when they're worshiping the gods, they're bowing down before these little 3-inch idols. They're not bowing down before gods. They cannot approach the gods but through this little wooden 3-inch idol. Most of them, 2 to 3 inches, fit in your pockets, and they would carry them around with them all day long. It's the mediation instrument. It's the way to connect with the gods. Knowing this is critical for this week's Torah portion, as you're going to find out. So let's start out. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, because remember Moses 40 years earlier, right? He takes off towards the land of Midian because he kills an Egyptian soldier, freaks out, he doesn't want to get killed, takes off, ends up in Midian, and marries Jethro's daughter. So Moses' father-in-law took Zipporah, Moses' wife, and after he had sent her back with her 2 sons, of whom the name was one Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land, and the name of the other was Eleazar, for he had said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Now he had said to Moses, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons with her. You better make time for me. Read between the lines. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down, kissed him. Okay? Let's just see if that is anything. Okay. And they asked each other about their well-being, and they went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that they had come upon him on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them, because they just came through the Red Sea, and they're about ready to go right before Mount Sinai. Then Jethro rejoiced for all the good which Yahweh had done for Israel, and he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. Jethro said, "Blessed be Yahweh, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all of the other gods, for in the very thing in which they behaved proudly, he was above them." Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. And so it was on the next day that Moses sat down to judge the people. And the people stood before Moses from morning till evening. So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, because Moses was in full-time ministry, and he was spending so much time in counseling, just put it in today's language, Moses' father-in-law said, "What on earth are you doing? You're going to kill yourself. You cannot possibly stand from morning till evening judging, counseling, and encouraging the people and going through this one at a time. You're obviously not a good businessman." Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people have come to me to inquire of God. They want to know how to do this or how to do that. When they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one another, and I make known the statutes of God and his laws." You see, because Moses had an internal idea of what God wanted. Now, this is very fascinating, isn't it? Because have we gone through the Torah yet? Have we even received the law of God yet? Okay. We have not even received the law of God, but listen what it says. It says, "I judge between one another, and I make known the statutes of God and his Torah." That's what it says. That's what it says even in the Hebrew. How does he know the law of God and the decrees and the judgments of God when he hasn't even received them yet? Is this a logical, good question? Unless they were already given. And this is what I want to submit to you, is that the laws of God, as I've said many times and have many teachings even proving this, but the laws of God were not given for the first time on Mount Sinai. These laws were well known in the conscience and in the mind of the predecessors, the patriarchs, all the way back to Adam. How many know that Adam spoke to Noah's father? Folks, that's unbelievable if you think about it. I mean, you're talking 4 generations removed from Adam to Abraham. Abraham, these guys lived a long time. So think about it today, 4 generations today. How many of you have a 5-generation picture in your family? Any of you? Okay, 1. Okay, 2, a couple of you guys. I have one as well. It's amazing. I remember it when I was a kid, having a 5-generation picture of my great-great-grandmother. And that's 5 generations. Now, I want you to picture this. Picture in that 5-generation picture, Adam, Seth, Noah's dad, Noah, and Shem, all in one picture. Or better than that, how about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Noah? I mean, who has the longest beard would be the contest in those pictures. Having a 5-generation picture would be unbelievable going back in Bible times because some of them lived hundreds of years. So there was no need to write down from my great-grandmother her recipe for her apple pie or her famous lemon meringue pie. There was no need to write it down. You just simply told your daughter who told her daughter who told her daughter, and everybody knew it. Because if you forgot it, you called up great-grandmother. This is exactly the way it was in Bible times, and we forget that because we only live an average of 75 to 80 years. But back then, we're talking hundreds of years. So if Noah didn't understand something, he's a kid. Adam is right there having dinner. So the commandments of God were given in the garden clearly. When he steps off of the ark, God even says, when he steps onto the ark, God is giving him instructions on take 2 of the unclean animals and bring them in the ark, and take 7 of the clean animals and put them in the ark. So the laws of clean and unclean were obviously already given. And so the people of God were coming to Moses, and there's no concept of God coming down on Mount Sinai yet. He says, I'm going to give you counsel, and God's going to be with you, but stand before God for the people so that you may bring the difficulties to God. You shall teach them the statutes and the laws and show them the way in which they must work, in which what they must do in verse 21. Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men such as fear God, men of truth. And this is when Jethro says you need to have men of tens, of fifties, of hundreds, of thousands, and of 10,000. This is what I call the Moses model. This is the first congregation. It's called the congregation in the wilderness. This is the first biblical governmental court system or judicial system or leadership system that is set up in the Bible. It is this system that would later be used in the first century with the Sanhedrin and the 70 elders, patterned after the 70 elders on Mount Sinai. It is this system that trickles its way down into the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, when the Shaliach, the apostles of God, are taking their concepts right from Judaism of the first century, right from the synagogue, and they are taking the exact same principles and positions of elders, deacons, exhorters, apostles, and all of the fivefold ministry, and they are now infusing the Ruach HaKodesh into it. They never started a new religion. They added the Holy Spirit into it, which in a way made it come alive. Does this make sense? So it's not something that's new that's happening. The amazing thing to me is this, is that Moses listened to his father-in-law. He listened to him. Even though, he didn't have to. But he took his advice, and Moses is, what's interesting, I should call it the Jethro model, really, when I think about it, because Moses didn't come up with this model. Moses instituted it, but we have the entire church governmental system. We can thank Jethro for it. Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, was the one that gave us this system. Let's move forward in chapter 19. So in the 3rd month after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. For they departed from Rephidim, had come to the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness, so Israel camped there before the mountain. Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all the people, for all the earth is mine. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Do you hear this? We all grew up, how many know that verse is found in the New Testament, right? You are a holy nation, a royal priesthood. And we read right past it as if the Apostle Paul is not quoting from the Torah. He's quoting from the Torah. Now let me ask you a question, especially for those of you that may be watching for the very first time online, and maybe you've never heard any of this type of thing, the Bible taught from an original Hebrew perspective, or the original author's perspective. But we would certainly not believe that God would change the intention of the original Scripture and make it mean something completely different. So when the Torah says right here that God says, if you keep my commandments, then you will be a holy people. Then you will be a royal priesthood. It is not a royal priesthood and a holy nation just because you decide to, hey, I'm going to call upon the God of Israel. He's going to be my God. You know, there's a lot of people in the first century that when they had hard times, they would just start calling on another God. Remember, how many remember on Mars Hill? Right? Paul walks up Mars Hill. He sees all these gods. They're all lined up. And all of a sudden he comes to one that says the unknown God. Paul says, that's the one that's the true God. And they say, what are you talking about? He says, I know who this guy is. They go, how do you know who he is? He's the unknown God. Can't you read? Unknown God. He's like, but I know who he is. He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's Yahweh Sevaot. This is the guy that you need to follow, and this is how you do it. You see, calling upon an unknown God is calling on a God that you don't know His character. You don't know who He is. You don't know His attributes. You don't know His perseverance, His patience, His kindness, His goodness. It doesn't radiate from you. You're serving an unknown God. When you follow the commandments of God, but you don't have the Ruach of God, you're like an Egyptian that is bowing before one of his gods because he's told to do that 3 times a day. When you serve a real God, when you serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you're serving a God that has attributes, that has character, that has something that is emanating from Him, a light that penetrates the darkness. If you walk into a room and your light doesn't penetrate the darkness, ladies and gentlemen, you're serving an unknown God. Because the real God that you serve, it is a mediator. He's not a mediator between God and men. Yeshua the Messiah comes. Now you should understand why He says, I'm the mediator. I'm the mediator. It's still true. You cannot have access to the gods. You cannot have access to the God of the universe. He's too holy. He's too brilliant. At just the hem of His garment would blind you and destroy you. So I have come to be in your pocket, for you to carry me with you everywhere that you go. I am the mediator. I am the one that you talk to. I am the one that will be with you. I am the comforter. You don't have to be in your pocket. You don't even have to have a pocket. I will be living in the inside of the Holy of Holies of your temple. But what I'm asking for you is I'm asking for you to let me mediate. Don't dictate to me what you want. Let me dictate to you what I want. And when you let me dictate to you, listen, let's just ask a question and be percentage-wise honest. How much of your prayers are dictating what you want from God? How much of your prayers are asking and begging? I don't know about you, my friends, but we are not the tail that we beg from God. You claim the promises that are already there. Why on earth are you praying for something He already dictated to you has happened? Some of you say, God, I just need you to take care of me financially, as if He hasn't already promised that. As He already has said, do I not clothe the birds in the middle of wintertime? Look outside. I don't know how they're not dead. Minus 10, how do they live? How do they survive? How do their eyeballs that don't even have eyelids just freeze? I don't understand. I have weird thoughts, I admit it. But He says that He loves us even more. Not a hair on your head is out of place or not numbered by the Creator. Yet we beg for bread that He promised to give. You're serving an unknown God. You don't know the God that you serve. I don't have to ask for the Father to provide for me. What I ask is, Father, help me distribute the bread properly that you give me. Help me to serve you in a way that is greater, that will impact people's lives. The begging that I do, that Jim Staley does behind my closet and sometimes right around the corner in tears, is, God, help me to fear you. Help me to know you. Help me to be a better representation of you. Help me to be a better mirror of you. I'm not begging for the things of life that are going to pass away. Who cares if I don't have anything to eat tomorrow? If He doesn't give me bread tomorrow, then He's telling me that I need a diet. I'm not fasting enough. I would rather die in the will of God than live a long life outside of it pretending to be so. I don't want to die begging from my God. I want to know what my God says in His Word so I can live a full life for Him. So he says, let them be ready. Yahweh says in verse 10, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow and let them wash their clothes. Wash their clothes. Catch this, wash their clothes. What's wrong with their clothes? Moses, God, seriously, we're out in the desert here. It's not like, we can run down to the laundromat here. What are you talking about? Wash your clothes. Why does Yahweh care about whether their clothes are clean or not? Because He's going to bring this up again, thousands of years later, on how important it is when you come before your Creator, when you come before a known God, you better know what He requires. You better know when you walk in before the King exactly what He wants. You better know His nuances, His likes, His dislikes, His opinions, His taste. Queen Esther, the greatest example of this in all the Bible, what happens? She comes before the king and she doesn't know what the king wants. So all these other maidens are saying, oh, I want this and let's do this and put that blue on me. I like blue. I always look good in blue. It brings my blue eyes out. Esther has her servant there who knows the king, and she does what? She says, what do you think? You know what the king wants. What should I wear? She submits to the one who knows the king. How many of you submit to those that know the king better than you do? And how many of you, when you ask them, what do you think I should do in my life? And you're only asking them because you value their opinion, then they give you your opinion, you go, you don't know what you're talking about. Why do I even ask you? There's a principle here of going to someone that has wisdom and asking for advice. Can you imagine the state of this world today? Imagine the state of just the Israelites. If Moses doesn't humble himself to take the opinion of his father-in-law, even ask. How many of you even take opinions when you don't ask, when someone just voluntarily gives you information? Your hair is out of place. Or, can I talk to you for a minute? I see something in your life. The humility that Moses has. The Bible says he's the most humble man on the earth. This is why he was chosen to lead. Moses' face glowed because he knew the God that he served. I want to ask a question. Does your face glow? How much time do you spend even in the Word? Because Moses spent so much time with God that they had to put a veil over his face. Where's the veil on your face? Where's the veil? Where's the veil on your presence? Because in Hebrew, the words are almost identical. Where is the veil in the presence? When you walk into a place, do you have to tell people that you're a believer in Yeshua? Do you have to witness with words? How about your spouse or your children? Where is the power in your life? The only difference between, I'm just going to be honest, because there are people that say, man, Jim, I would love to be in your shoes and be able to hear God's voice the way you do, or this or that, or pick whoever you want, or whoever your person is that you look to, that you look up to, or whatever. The only difference, possibly between you and me, is I spend a lot of my time begging God to not kill me, because I recognize what a wretched sinner that I am, and I seek His face to fear His name. Some of you think it's just easy for me to talk and to be up here. I'm scared to death most of the time that I'm going to say something that is not of His nature or not of His will. I want more than anything in my life just to know Him more. And I will stop at nothing to hear His voice. Will you? Do you bleed? Does it bother you at the end of the day if you haven't taken time out with Him? If it doesn't bother you, you're not seeking His face. It's such basic things that we can learn. So many things. Where do I go from here? let's just paraphrase it because I got to end this section. So then people do what? Moses is up on the mountain for 40 days. They lose the mediator. So they build a calf, a golden calf. Everybody takes off their earrings, their jewelry, and they melt it down. They make a golden calf, which is one of the major idols out of both Egypt and for Israel themselves. They adopted that. The problem is that we, and I just had a conversation with someone yesterday trying to explain this to them, and I've explained this many times before, but maybe you haven't heard this, that there's always two perspectives in the universe. There is your perspective, and then there's God's perspective. There's Yahweh's perspective. From our perspective, we always think we're fine. Have you ever noticed that? You've never disagreed with yourself. You always agree with yourself. Even when you wrong, you will defend your wrongness when you know you're wrong. It's totally illogical. I do it all the time. I don't understand it. It takes me all of 3 seconds. In that one argument I had with my wife, I remember this, that 3 seconds later I realized I was wrong. I'm being illogical. I'm defending something that I shouldn't be defending. But the Egyptian blood was running so strong in them that from their perspective, they make this golden calf. They're just replacing the mediator. Because remember, Moses was the mediator between Yahweh and the Israelites. So they're not trying to serve another god. This is an idiomatic expression when they said, "Behold Israel, the God who brought you out of Egypt." If this was, because it didn't say God, it said Elohim. If this was Moses, they would have turned to the Israelites and said, "Behold, the judge who brought you out of Egypt." He's the mediator. Moses is the mediator. The golden calf simply replaced Moses. This is why in the very text itself, it says, "Now tomorrow we will have," Aaron says this, "a feast unto the Lord," unto Yahweh. Because from their perspective, they're throwing a feast for Yahweh for bringing them out of Egypt and sustaining them up to this point. They lost track of Moses. But from the other perspective, from Yahweh's perspective, who's having a conversation with Moses, he says, "Mo, we got a problem. I'm looking down there and these Israelites are worshiping another god. They're in idolatry. Get out of my way. I'm going to destroy them." And Moses says, you shouldn't do that. These are your people. Are you kidding me? We're going to do all this for nothing? Do you know what I went back there running from the Egyptians? You know what I went through. And he convinces Yahweh to back down. And you know the rest of the story. And he gives the Ten Commandments and so on and so forth. And all of this happens, between Exodus chapter 19 and Exodus 32. And all these things, but the point of the matter is this, is that we tend to worship God the way that we want to worship Him. Even when you know the truth, we still don't realize that we're worshiping Him sometimes the way we want to worship Him. We still treat others the way we think that we should treat others, when the reality is we're not auditing ourselves all the time. And then how many of you want to know God so bad that you get frustrated with God because He hasn't changed you yet enough? So, and maybe you fall in that camp. I fall in that camp quite often. "Father, what's wrong with you? Why can't you fix me? Am I that messed up you can't fix me? Have you given up on me?" I fall into that camp many times. I want God to change me. I was talking to someone the other day or last night, and I said, it's kind of like 10 panes of glass that are frosted, and you put like a black ball behind the panes of glass. You can see the ball. It's blurry, but you can see the ball and you go, "That's the black spot I want to get in my life." How many of you feel like that? You know the black spot's there, but you can't quite get it. And you keep asking the Father, "Why don't you get rid of this black spot?" But what you don't know is He hasn't gotten to that layer yet. He's breaking glass after glass after glass in your life. He's trying to get to that point, but He just hasn't gotten to that layer yet. Give Him the time. I promise you, He loves your zeal. He loves the fact that you see it. He loves the fact that you want to get rid of it. What He wants you now is to rest in the shalom of the layer that you're on. He wants you to rest in the peace that He's dealing with this layer. He's impressed that you're able to see beyond that. But what He wants you to do is focus on what's in front of you right now. Do what He's put in front of you right now. That's the commandment that He has for you today. Whatever it is for you, whether it's auditing yourself, whether it's listening to someone that's giving you instruction, whatever it may be, let God speak to you. And then be obedient to whatever He has to say. It's time that we get to know this unknown God. How many are tired of praying the same prayers over and over and over again? I'm not praying the same prayers over and over again. If I can find the promise in the Scripture, I'm going to claim it and thank Him for it as if it already exists. And if I never receive it in this life, it's okay. Because He promised to give it to me at some point in eternity. And I would rather, quite honestly, some of you, pray for your financial issues or, health. Those seem to be the two big ones that people pray for. Well, the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, when do you want Him to give it to you? If you're 40 years old and you live till 80 and He heals you and makes you rich, you get it for 40 years. What if He says, you don't know what you're asking, I can only give it to you once? I don't know, but if I had a choice, ladies and gentlemen, I would want it for eternity. It's not important for me here. Whether my body is healthy, that's up to Him. Whether I'm poor, rich, or indifferent is up to Him. What matters is, what am I doing with the talents that He's given me? What am I doing with them? It's up to Him how He dishes it back out. What's up to me is, what am I doing with it right now? Amen? And Father God, thank You so much for this portion of Your service. God, I just thank You for Your Ruach and ask that You would just move in a greater and more impactful way, Lord, tonight and in nights to come. We thank You for who You are. And Lord, I want to just say I appreciate You. I appreciate You, Father, in the shadows and in the light. Thank You for being with us. In Yeshua's name, amen.